Hello, I'm Jeremy, and welcome to another episode of RevUs Reviews. If there was a movie out there that had everything you wanted in a movie, what would it be like? A mystery movie with action and comedy, perhaps? Or a romantic sci-fi horror? Well, for me, that movie already exists. It's a 1991 comedic psychological drama named Drop Dead Fred. In order to cope with her strict mother, Elizabeth Cronin had an imaginary friend named Drop Dead Fred, who played with her and cared for her like a father. One day, Elizabeth and Fred made mud pies, and her mother was so enraged at the mess she trapped Fred in a jack-in-the-box and tied it up with masking tape, threatening Elizabeth that if she touched it, she would throw it away. Years later, Elizabeth has grown up and has been facing struggles since she divorced her husband Charles, got fired, and got her car stolen, so she moved back into her old house with her mother. While unpacking, she discovered the jack-in-the-box her mother trapped Drop Dead Fred in. She takes the box and reopens it in her room, releasing Drop Dead Fred. Now out of the box, Drop Dead Fred and Elizabeth work together to help get Charles back and get Elizabeth's life back together. Unlike the previous episodes, I won't be talking about the humor first, because most of the humor is based around the character of Drop Dead Fred. Although occasionally there's a funny line, like when Elizabeth enters the courtroom to fill her job as court reporter and she explains why she's late, and the defendant says, "Do what I did, plead insanity." So we'll talk about the characters first instead. First, Elizabeth. Elizabeth is a really likable and sympathetic protagonist. She starts out really insecure and unconfident, but with the help of Fred, learns to be more confident and secure. It's really interesting seeing her journey, and Phoebe Cates does a great job of capturing the personality of the character. Next is Elizabeth's mother, Paula. What makes Paula an interesting character is that unlike Miss Hannigan from Annie, or Mrs. Mavilda from The Christmas Tree, she's actually a complex character and not just a stereotypical mean mother. While Paula is incredibly strict and emotionally manipulative, you can tell deep down that she does care for Lizzie. She reads her a story when she's little in the opening. She doesn't mind Elizabeth moving in with her, and even though she's trying to get rid of Elizabeth's best friend, she's only doing it to help Lizzie become a normal functioning adult. Although she does do some awful things, like trapping Drop Dead Fred in the jack-in-the-box, knowing full well that Lizzie would be upset at this, and saying things to Lizzie like, "Sometimes I don't think I love you as much as I used to." Seriously, that's a line in the movie. My point is that while Paula does horrible things, it's clear that she has good intentions and wants to look out for her daughter, unlike someone like Buck Cluck from Chicken Little, who's ashamed to be even associated with his son. Moving on to Mickey Bunce, Elizabeth's other childhood friend, aside from Drop Dead Fred. Mickey's a really nice character. He's incredibly pleasant, kind, and friendly. My favorite scene with him is when he bumps into Lizzie on her way out of the courtroom. It's funny, and it captures the joy and awkwardness you feel when you meet up with an old friend. Also, I like how Fred absolutely hates Mickey because of how sweet and feminine he is. It's a funny idea and leads to a lot of funny lines. I also like Mickey's voice. I don't know if that's what he actually sounds like, or if he was just putting on a voice, but regardless, I like the sound of it. It's very pleasant sounding, fitting a lot with the character of Mickey Bunce. Next is Charles, who is just the worst. Remember when I said that even though she was strict deep down, Paula loved Elizabeth and wished the best for her? That does not apply to Charles at all. He's like a parody of soap opera husbands who cheat on their wives 3 times a day. He's so awful, you wonder if there was ever a point where he loved Elizabeth at all. However, that's the point. Charles isn't meant to be likable. He's essentially a scumbag who manipulates Lizzie for her love for him, even though he loves someone else. And Lizzie's quest to get Charles back is symbolic and shows that sometimes the things we want aren't worth getting. And now, let's talk about the best character in this movie, and probably the best movie character ever created, Drop Dead Fred. From the moment he appears all the way to the end, Drop Dead Fred is enormously entertaining. He's like a live-action cartoon character. He's incredibly childish and silly, living in his own little world. Every line he says is either hilarious or emotional. Also, Fred is kind of like Paula, but in the opposite way. While Drop Dead Fred is incredibly childish, obnoxious, and does bad things, like sink Janie's houseboat and trick Elizabeth into believing Charles wants her back, he only does these things because he's an imaginary friend. He has no perception of right and wrong because he isn't meant to. He doesn't understand that his actions have negative consequences, especially because Lizzie is the only person who could see or hear him. So he doesn't have to worry about being blamed for anything. Also, I love the relationship Fred and Elizabeth have, both when she's a child and when she's an adult. As a child, you can really see the camaraderie and friendship between them and how heartbreaking it is when Paula takes Fred away. And when she's an adult, even though Drop Dead Fred is disgusted by Lizzie's adult life, you can tell he wants her to be happy. A good example of where this is shown is the scene where Lizzie tells Fred about why she likes Charles and he's smiling sweetly before fake barfing at the romance. The reason he's smiling isn't because of what Lizzie's saying, but because of how happy she is when she's saying it. This is what critics of Drop Dead Fred don't get. He's obnoxious, silly, and doesn't always do the right thing, but he genuinely cares about Lizzie and wants her to live a happy life, even if that means she doesn't need him anymore. They just couldn't look past his obnoxious attitude, looking up women's skirts and scrubbing dog poo on the furniture to see that. Moving on from the characters, let's talk about the emotional moments. While I mainly like silly, stupid comedies, I'm also a fan of emotional movies, specifically ones that address characters' motives and what they're going through in a way that isn't unpleasant or unnerving. In my opinion, Drop Dead Fred does this perfectly. Whenever an emotional scene happens in this movie, they just let the characters talk, while occasionally playing whimsical music. The dialogues, the discussions are full of emotion, are really engaging, and use the scene itself to get you to feel, rather than smothering you with a pillow of emotion like The Book of Life, or playing an Oscar Beatty soundtrack to tug at your heartstrings like The Pursuit of Happiness. They delve into the character's struggle without being incredibly unpleasant. Finally, let's talk about one of the more interesting aspects of the film. The fact that the film never makes it clear whether Drop Dead Fred is real or just a creation of Elizabeth's mind. The YouTube and Amazon Prime description for this movie both suggest that Fred is a creation of Elizabeth's subconscious. However, there are numerous instances where Fred has a real effect on the world, like when he rips up Elizabeth's childhood toys, scrubs dog poo on Paula's carpet, and whacks Lizzie on the head with a shovel. There's also two parts of a scene that both prove and disprove Fred's realness. While in the doctor's office, Fred sees other imaginary friends with their own kids, and he goes up to them and they pal around like old friends. This would imply that they're real, because otherwise how would Fred know them? They're just imaginary friends of random kids. Not to mention how one of the imaginary friends, Namby-Pamby, appears out of nowhere and isn't shown to have her own kid. However, after that scene, the doctor prescribes Elizabeth pills designed to kill Fred. And according to the doctor, the pills kill the imaginary friend by neutralizing the part of the brain that creates him or her, further implying that Fred could be in Lizzie's head. This gives the film a kind of a Fight Club vibe, in that we never know how much is real and how much is in the head of our protagonist. We don't know if Fred is real and is actually doing this, or if Fred isn't real at all, and Elizabeth is just doing this to herself, adding a great deal of mystery and ambiguity to an already great film. In conclusion, I love Drop Dead Fred with a flaming passion. It's not only creative, fun, and silly, but it is also really emotional and sentimental. It's a film that addresses the dangers of being too strict with your child and creates emotion naturally. Not to mention, it created one of the best movie characters of all time, played by Rick Mayall, one of the best British comedians of all time. If you love emotionally engaging films and don't mind obnoxious characters, I recommend seeing Drop Dead Fred. It's an acquired taste, but one I enjoy very much. This is one Fred that I don't want to drop dead. That's all for now. Join me next time when I talk about a horror classic with goblins, ghost grandpas, and this scene.
They're eating her! And then they're going to eat me! Oh my God!
See you then. And yes, I am actually going to be...
Radio will continue in just a moment.
And yes, I actually am going to be covering Troll 2.